Next up, it is all about the table object. So open up the table object.py script from the table object folder. The last few videos were all about the feature layer object in the ArcGIS API for Python. It is now time for the table object to take center stage. And there aren't many differences between a feature layer object and a table object, with the main one being that a table does not have a geometry. We'll give the table object the same treatment as the feature layer object, where we're going to show how we can create a table object in various ways. First, let's head over to documentation for the table object. Table object sits in the features module alongside the feature layer object. To create a table object, all we need is the URL to the table. Table objects represent entity classes with uniform properties. In addition to working with entities with location, as we saw with feature layer objects, the ArcGIS API for Python can also work with non-spatial entities as rows in tables. Hence, we have the table class. We see the note here that working with tables is similar to working with a feature layer object, except that the rows or features in a table do not have a geometry, and tables ignore any geometry related operation. So you're going to see many of the same methods available for the table as there are for a feature layer, and the geometry operations still remain in the table methods. They just won't do anything. For example, we see the append method here, and it has an update geometry property, which will have no effect when setting this parameter with a table. Scroll down, we can see some more methods. The calculate method is also for a feature layer object, as is the delete features and the edit features. The table object also has properties, and these are also similar to the feature layer. Here we see the estimates. It still says here that it returns information such as row count and extent, but we all know a table doesn't have an extent. And it would be nice for this documentation to be cleaned up, as it looks like a copy and paste from the feature layer object. We can see here layers that support this property. It should really be tables. Plenty of other methods and properties for you to browse through on your own time. For now, I'm going to head back to our Python script. Up top, we are importing our GIS class so we can access our ArcGIS Online content. From the features module, we are importing the FeatureLayerCollection object, as we are going to create a table object via the FeatureLayerCollection object. And also we are importing the table object, as we will directly create a table object from a URL. We first access ArcGIS Online using the GIS class and supplying the home string. We'll assign our GIS object to a variable called AGOL. We're then going to use our GIS object and the content manager with the get method supplying in our feature service item ID, which I'll paste in now from my notepad. The get method will return an item object that will assign to a variable called item. We are first going to access table objects via the item object tables property. Just like we saw with the item object having a layers property, there is a tables property that is also a list, and it is a list of table objects. The list will be empty if there are no tables in the feature service, or it will return table objects representing the tables that are available. So for each table object in our item object tables property, which is a list, we're going to print the table object the screen. Now we can see that we have two tables currently in our feature service. So two feature objects should be printed to screen. So let's run the script and check it out. Our script is complete, and we can see we were returned two table objects, and we have the URL to each of those tables. If we check the end, we have the ID as they sit in the feature service. We saw that our feature layers took up 0, 1, 2, and 3. So our tables are 4 and 5. I'll comment out our first example. And in our second example, we are going to access a table object via the item object, but we're going to use indexing. So we know that there are two tables in our feature service. Here we are creating two variables, table 1 and table 2, that will both be table objects. We're accessing the item object, and the tables property, and we're using indexing of 0 to access the first table. Notice that we are not using the ID. It is not 4 and 5. We are accessing the first table and then the second table. We will then print both table objects to screen just to see that we have accessed those correctly. I'll run the script. And we can see once more we have returned both table objects, but we access individually using list indexing. In the next example, we will use a table name along with the item object and list comprehension to return a table object that we are interested in. So for each table object in our item object tables property, which is a list, if the table object property's name is equal to, and I'm going to put in the name I'm interested in, it is table for training with FDM 1-to-1, then return that table object. Now list comprehension will always return a list. We're expecting one element to be returned in that list, a table object, and we want to access that first element of the list. I want to assign that to a variable called table. Our table variable will represent a table object and we'll print that to screen. I'll run the script. As you can see, we have our table object that represents our table for training with FDM 1-to-1, and that is at ID 4. Next up, we are going to access a table object using a FeatureLayerCollection object. So we create a variable called FLC. We're going to set that to equal our FeatureLayerCollection class, and we're using the fromitem method where we're supplying in our item object. We now have a FeatureLayerCollection object that's similar to the item object, has a property called tables that is also a list of table objects. So here we are accessing our FeatureLayerCollection object, the tables property, and using indexing to access the first and the second table from our feature service. We'll assign those to variables called table 1 and table 2 and print those to screen. So I'll run the script now. And we'll see once more we have our table objects returned for both the tables in our feature service for ID 4 and ID 5. But with indexing, we use 0 to access the first table, which is ID of 4, which is our table for training with FDM 1-to-1. And ID of 5 is our table for training with FDM 1-to-many. In the next example, we are going to use the table class itself and the fromitem method available with a table object. So here we'll create two variables, table 1 and table 2. We're going to use the table class and the fromitem method. We set the item parameter to be our item object. Now here's where it gets interesting. The table ID. Here we're setting that to equal 0 and 1 as we have been for our indexes. Now it also looks like I have a spare parenthesis in there, which I will remove. So let's print our two table objects to screen. Our script is complete and we have our two table objects. But do note that the table ID parameter is very misleading. We did not put in 4 and 5. We put in 0 for the first table and 1 for the second table. So this is like using indexing rather than the actual table IDs. In our last example, we are going to access the table using the table class itself and supplying in a table URL. Here we'll create a variable called table URL. Look at that, I still have feature layer in there. That should be table. We're going to use the table class. We're going to set the URL parameter to be our table URL, which I'm going to grab from ArcGIS Online in a moment. And we'll set our GIS parameter to be our GIS object. So I'll pop on over to ArcGIS Online. Here we have our feature service, and we can see here we have our tables. And I'll go into the table for training with FDM 1-to-many. And on the right hand side, I'm going to copy this URL by clicking the icon to copy. I now have the URL to the table. I'm going to go back over to the Python script and I'll paste in for the URL. And we're going to assign the calling of the table class to a variable called table. So we'll have a table object and we'll print that to screen. So I will run the script now. And we can see we have a table object for our table for training with FDM one-to-many table that has an ID of 5 in the URL. We have successfully created table objects in several different ways. We used the item object tables property. We used the FeatureLayerCollection object tables property. We used the table class fromitem method, and we also used the table class directly to create a table object. Make sure to continue on to the next video in this series, and also make sure to subscribe. Take care.